Let's figure out what Brent's doing there in the runs in Slipknot. The song is in F minor, and you can play an F minor 7. What I sometimes like to do is I like to move the flat 7 to a 9 and play. It's got a kind of a slightly more interesting sound. But that first riff is a riff, and I usually think about it as arpeggios in order to come up with the right notes. So the first arpeggio is an F minor arpeggio. It's just going right up from the 5 to the root, to the minor third, to the 5. Bum, bum, bum. And then the down arpeggio from there is actually an E flat major. Sounds weird. Some people don't play this actually right, but it's bum, 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 bum. So that arpeggio is just an E major chord arpeggiated. And then the last part of the riff is really a C minor arpeggio, and then the F note. So it's probably the easiest way, if you have large enough hands to do it, is to do it all with one hand, where you start on your thumb, but when you do that walk down, use your ring finger, your middle finger, and your index finger. And then when you do this, thumb, index finger, ring finger, middle finger. So that allows you to always have a finger to be able to be placed in the right spot for the next note. So that's probably the best way to do it. If you have small hands, that could be a hard reach because you're going from this to that. That's a pretty big stretch there. And so you probably saw earlier in the video, I sort of used this fingering, which is easier for me. But then you got to move your thumb down here. So that gets a little hard if you're trying to do it really fast to go from, because you're really jumping your thumb down like that. The other way to look at it is if you're playing in a band and you have a bass player, there really isn't a lot of need to, hammer on the bass notes with your left hand. So you can actually use your left hand to cheat a little bit and use that, the C, use your index finger on your bottom hand, on your left hand, for the C. So it's something like this. So you're just kind of cheating with that so that you can use your comfortable fingering here without having to move your thumb down. So that's just one little tip if you have really small hands and if it just feels more comfortable to use two hands. Now let's talk about the rest of that riff. So there's a small little arpeggio that starts it, which is, and then the first of several diminished walk-ups and walk-downs. So the first diminished run after you do the, starts on a C, and diminished is where you're basically going minor intervals. So up 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's a diminished, and if you're gonna run all the way up the whole diminished run, it's so that's the diminished run in C, and that basically leads to doing a riff in G minor. It's basically the same riff that you did before in F minor, but just transposed. So you're doing the G minor arpeggio with a C note. And the walk down is on an F arpeggio. So it's and then D minor with a G note at the end. I'll do it up to speed. The next diminished run also starts with a, and then this is a diminished run starting in D. And right to a diminished run in E. You can probably see I'm kind of struggling a little bit with the fingering, so part of what you're going to need to do is figure out what's the best fingering for that diminished run. If you have a large hand, again, you probably can do where you're only kind of stepping over with the index finger for the very last note and you're using all 5 fingers. You can also kind of use that cheat that I showed you earlier where you use the index finger of your left hand if you have a smaller hand and you can't make that big reach, where you do the rest of the diminished run with 4 fingers, but you use that left hand for this. So it's you're just kind of using that extra finger on your left hand to kind of make it so that you don't have to do as big a stretch to hit that, you know, full diminished, all the diminished notes. The other thing you can do, and this is probably if you've never had formal training, you're going to want to make sure that you think about how you can adjust your wrist and kind of swivel your wrist to make it easier to do that. Because if you realize you don't actually have to hold all the notes at the same time, you're playing them, you know, in a run. So once you lift your thumb, you can kind of move your wrists so it's easier to get to that. Right? So swiveling your wrist can sometimes help if you have very small hands to be able to comfortably hit the notes that you're hitting. The very last run is actually probably the most trickiest. And this is one I almost always wind up doing with, at least partially with 2 hands. But I'll show it to you with 1 hand. So the beginning of the riff is E, G, B, F sharp, A, and then you walk down a D arpeggio. So E, G, B, F sharp, A, F sharp, D, A. So that's a D arpeggio. Starting on the 5th, playing the 3rd, the root, and the 5th again. So let's try that one more time. So the D arpeggio, and then you're going to go to an A arpeggio. Again, starting on the 5th of an A. So it's, so those arpeggios together are, and you're going to do a C arpeggio, a G arpeggio. All right, so it's a bunch of the same arpeggios with the 4 notes, starting with the D. D, A, C, G, D, C, G, ending on the A minor. Why I like to sometimes use my left hand is, again, it's a fairly big stretch to do those arpeggios with a single hand, especially here where you have to get up to a G. Like that's a huge stretch. Granted, I can lift my hand and kind of move, but to get to that, for me, with small hands, that's tricky. So what I'll tend to do is I'll use my left hand on the bottom note, or in this case, the bottom 2 notes even, and I'll do. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm doing the D arpeggio, but I'm hitting the bottom note with my left hand, so then I can do the same thing here. So if using that, you know, sort of, I guess you call it a cheat, with the left hand makes it easier to do that, you can kind of pull it off. So that whole riff is going to sound something like this. And of course, at that point, you're now ready to go into the A minor. And the A minor is that same riff. Okay, so the arpeggios are A minor, add the D, and then a G arpeggio, and an E minor, and then an A. If this video was helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks.